to keep this short. One of the things I've been, I might explain why Bayard Rustin for me has meant a lot. I've never met the gentleman. But to make it quick, it was my social studies teacher in my junior year in Mount Pleasant High School. And, you know, you go into a class, this is like 63, 64, 65, 66, up in upstate. And I remember thinking, this gentleman, his name was Jack Hickey, would always bring in these guest speakers, and I thought, yeah, well, here's 40 minutes, I'll never get back. That class changed my life. They had a young staffer from the American Friends Service Committee come in, and the three things he said impacted me so much dramatically. It was a white staffer, and he talked about the history of the Quakers, traditional religious society of Friends, and that was good. But then the next thing he said really caught my attention a little bit, because when you think about, I think everyone's here basically of the New England area, the eastern coast. 62, Cuban Missile Crisis. November 22nd, Kennedy assassinated down in Dallas, Texas. 64, you started seeing the images coming up from the south of the lynchings and the burnings and the hoses and the dogs. And he was talking about this predominantly white peace organization, the Quakers, what they were thinking of how they could be allies in the struggle. But he talked about this concept of the power of one, and this idea that we all have a moral compass, and somehow we figure out what we decide to do with it. But it was the third thing that really made the difference. They had an AFSC high school work camp in the Pocono Mountains, and I went to go. The first time I even heard of the name Bayard Rustin, he was not in my history books in terms of school or whatever. But they also had a Guy and Candy Carowin from the Highlander Center were also there, another white folk singing couple. But they called themselves cultural workers. And they also talked about Bayard. But I think the transforming moment in terms of like why I decided I wanted to be involved is I thought, well, he was gay. I was an orphan. That's pretty much his story. And kind of making the connection about what was going on with this gentleman, but also the time frame of what was happening as well. To make a very long story short, I ended up working for an organization called the War Resisters League. Where did Bayard Rustin work? The War Resisters League. Where did Bayard Rustin work? The American Friends Service Committee. And I'm beginning to think, well, there might be some connection here. And quite honestly, as someone who's black, pacifist, predominantly white peace organizations, the social justice movement, understanding the importance of why you would not be kind of an ally in a struggle or whatever. But the thing that got us, I think for me personally, is that I worked at WRL for a number of years, and I wanted to move east of the Mississippi, and the only office they had open was Durham, North Carolina. And that's when I heard about someone called Pauli Murray. Never heard of her. Then I found out that Pauli Murray and Bayard Rustin knew each other. Real quick, that Journey of Reconciliation they did in 1947, women were supposed to go on that. Pauli Murray and Ella Baker, they didn't go, but the other folks did it. So when we got to the WRL, we thought about the anniversaries of the March on Washington, and we thought, why aren't we finding some way to acknowledge Bayard's role in that? And because they happened every 10 years, 63, 73, 83, we said, well, we're going to form this thing called the Bayard Rustin Commemorative Alliance just to have some way to acknowledge and thank him. It wouldn't be until 2003 when Martin Luther King III and Coretta said, maybe it's time to acknowledge our gay and lesbian community and how Bayard played a role in that. And that was the first time someone said, that's fine, because at verse 1 they wanted to do back in 83, Walter, who was the guy in D.C., black preacher, and they wanted to have someone like named Audre Lorde to go up and represent the gay and lesbian community. He said, we ain't having no lesbian stand on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and talk about Bayard Rustin. We had to sit in this gentleman's office in order to make that change. She spoke on the steps in 1983. So we wanted to continue the legacy. But I must say that no one could have thought in 2013, August 28th, 50 years to the day, our first black president would be standing on those steps and acknowledging Bayard. That's the journey in which we've had. So to be here at Voluntown and understand what Bayard's footsteps have been is here as well. It's just an honor and a pleasure to say that as well. So real quick, you need to know that the Pauli Murray home that you saw, that's all been renovated now. It's a national historic treasure. They're building another facility on the site for trainings and whatnot. But at this point, they're also trying to figure out how they can acknowledge both Pauli Murray, Bayard Rustin, black, gay. She wouldn't use that term, but in terms of that sexual orientation, whatever, not to be embarrassed, not to be ashamed, not to be apologetic. It's just what it is, and how you carry that legacy on as much as it is now. So for me to be doing Warby Sisters League last night, 95 years, where Bayard was involved, and then to be here in Voluntown, I could not ignore the opportunity. So I'm just honored and a pleasure to be here with y'all, and I'm excited about the panel we're going to have as well. So I bring you greetings from Durham. I bring you greetings from Southerners on the Ground and the National Black Justice Coalition. Thank you, Pauli. Thank you, Bayard.
So we'll begin our panel discussion.
All right. Oh, while everyone's getting settled, I don't know if people weren't down in New York City yesterday. This is the brochure. This is the brand new poster for the 95th anniversary. It's just beautiful. It's sort of like, remember that thing of the people putting a flower in the guns of the whatever, but it's beautiful. So there's stickers, there's T-shirts, and it's going to be done for like a year's worth of. You can pass it around just so you can see it. Anyway, okay. All right.
Mandy, I was going to ask you, just before we all start speaking,
Yeah.
I know there was the postage stamp.
Oh, yes.
Could you tell me about
Thank you for reminding me. Does anyone remember when the Harvey Milk postage stamps came out a couple of years? That was so exciting. That was a unique effort, and the same crew is putting together an effort to do a Bayard Rustin postage stamp. And what's so exciting, they don't want like a blast of a Facebook. You're right. Why would it be good to have a Bayard Rustin postage stamp? In fact, Harvey Milk, Stuart Milk, who's a family member of Harvey Milk's a part of the campaign. So when we get done, we'll figure out a way to get that information out to you. But it's just a question of the postage. He would be both in the Black Heritage stamp thing, but also the brand new gay and lesbian postage stamp thing as well. So anyway, that's going on. It's something brand new. It would be a wonderful way to acknowledge and celebrate as well. So Bayard Rustin postage stamps campaign or something like that. Thank you. I'm glad you said that. I forgot about it. All right.
So we're just going to have a discussion, but please feel free to join in, to ask questions, and to shape the discussion. One of the things that we saw with the videos on Pauli Murray and Bayard Rustin was they were both committed to connecting different social movements, civil rights movements. And of course, you all in your different kinds of work, activism, are very aware of the importance of those intersections and building those connections. And I was wondering if you might talk about your own work, and then we can maybe make connections historically with the work of Rustin and Murray as well.
Do you want me to start?
If you could reintroduce yourself, because a lot of people.
Oh, yes. Thanks for those who just came.
My name is Carolyn Paterno. I am the minister of All Souls Unitarian Universalist Congregation in New London. And I have been involved in a number of social justice movements. And what I remind myself and the folks that I serve at All Souls is that you don't really have the luxury a lot of times of choosing which movement you would like to be part of. When needs arise, you must respond if you are a justice seeker in the world. So for example, when I came to New London to serve this congregation, I had not anticipated that I would be as deeply involved in homelessness as I became. And I became as deeply involved because there was a deep need and a growing need and an emergency. And also because I had friends and colleagues who encouraged me to get involved. And that quite naturally led into peace work because the Iraqi war was beginning. So the folks who were involved in homelessness kind of spilled over into the folks who were doing peace work. That's how I met Joanne. And then all of those things, you just build those relationships. And then when there is, to deal with the reason why we are all together tonight, when there's a shooting at a gay club in Florida, and all of those people, many of those people who died are people of color, largely Latino, then all the folks that you've been working with, doing work on homelessness and peace work and immigration justice, you just ask folks to show up, right, Constance? You and I worked so hard on that rally. You ask people to show up and they do, because they understand naturally that you're going to show up for the issues that they hold close in their hearts, and for justice in general. It all starts to look the same. Justice begins to look the same in all of these movements. And you get to make a lot of really beloved friends and keep in that a spark of joy in the work, however difficult it is. I learned, are you saying gay joy, Seamus? But I learned that from Frida, and you're talking about how your mom and dad talk about cheerfulness in that work. And from so many of the people that I have met here, the Stellars in your environmental work, I could look around this room and see so many people doing that work. So intersectionality is about being intentional.
That's it.
It's also about being responsive and responsible, is what I would say.
Yeah, it's my turn. Well, I'm probably situated totally differently than most people in the room. I grew up in Mississippi, and I have a friend who died a few years ago by the name of Barker Hendricks. He was an artist, taught for many years at Connecticut College. And when he and I met, I said, I grew up in Mississippi, and his response was, you grew up in the belly of the beast. And I had parents who had been married for some time, almost 14 years before I was born. And they had the right to vote. And having the right to vote in Mississippi at the time they were voting was a very unique, dangerous, and wonderful thing. You had to pay $2 poll tax to vote. Now, you could work all week and not make $2, but that wasn't the hard part. I have saved in my collection of memorabilia the test that was given by the register that you had to pass in order to vote. And it asked you an ordinary amount of questions, such as, is your husband a minister? Or what do you do? And then you had to read and interpret part of the Mississippi Constitution. And often the person who's going to make the decision could not read and interpret it himself or herself. So the people who were raising me had some really odd and weird ideas, especially for the South, and especially for that time. Things like the high ground, if you want to stand on, that high moral ground has a high moral cost. Are you willing to pay for it? And having grown up in that kind of environment, that's why I'm sitting in this chair, and that's why I'm a prosecutor. I listened to the young man talk about Barnett Rustin. I listened to the professor talk about Paul. And it's interesting when you listen to young people talk about history when they weren't really there. And it's not that they have a jaded view or a misguided view. It's just they weren't there. And World War I ended, and a lot of British soldiers went home. And a lot of those soldiers had established relationships. And those of you who like history know that the Brits had a very, very bad homophobic scare. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have the transatlantic line with everybody being able to talk to Europe. But that fear spread to America. And when you got into the 40s, there was a war. that war put a lot of men together. A lot of men went in the service. How many of you heard of a blue discharge?
Blue discharge? What is it?
Section 8.
Which is,
If they assume that you had any type of tendency,
okay. Yeah.
you could be discharged. That discharge denied you access to what?
VA benefits.
You got
That
it.
stuff.
So your chance at getting that home with no money down,
Mm-hmm.
that was $7,000 to $8,000, $10,000 in a Levitt town, meant today that your ability to create wealth was severely limited.
Yeah.
It's also reflected upon what your parents, your children, grandchildren would have. So it's really a lot bigger than me. I think I'm a victim of my circumstance with my parents, and I can't be free. I can't have rights unless you got it. Because when I protect you, I am protecting myself.
As well.
It's being a little greedy, it's being a little selfish, but it's also being right. Because if you really want to be right, you have to be willing to stand naked in the cold. And if you can't do it, you're going to be stuck. Because eventually you're going to be called on it. When you least expect it, least want it to happen to you, but you will be called. So I do my best every day to live that dream and that foundation my parents gave me. I heard about Brian Rustin when I was a kid. And most people didn't. But you also got to remember that was Joseph McCarthy. And there was J. Edgar Hoover. And I have a copy of the Green Book. You know what the Green Book is? My 1956 original, I think it is, of the Green Book. There's a photo of Dr. King in Memphis at a grocery store, because there were grocery store chains, small, owned by black folk, and this guy had Dr. King come to visit.
Yeah.
This is before the boycott.
Wow.
In the early 50s, I brought that because I was reading it before I left. My stepfather and a group of people got Thurgood Marshall to come be the speaker in a town called Mount Value, Mississippi. One of the original all-black town started by black slaves in Mississippi after the Civil War. And when you had people running, I like to use the word running amok like that in the South, they all knew each other. And they all protected each other. Because so Bernard Rustin could not just go to a hotel and stay. And if his itinerary, same thing for Thurgood Marshall, their itineraries are known, they could be unknown. So they stayed in the homes of people because they first off, the hotels are not available, and the little black hotels are there. If you were making your way there, you're going to have a problem because someone wanted you eliminated. So as I heard about him, you would hear rumors about other things. But again, we're victims of our past, and my parents had a line they drew in the dirt that folk are folk. And if everybody likes you, you got a problem. Because they're not. But if you want everyone to at least have a shot, you have to give everybody a chance. So I became a prosecutor because as a prosecutor, if I want the law to be fair, you have to work at making sure it happens. My first couple weeks at law school, I have this memory that as we're sitting in class in criminal law, and the teacher's the professor's going through the class, asking people what they thought. And, there were people already whose grandparents have been lawyers, or parents are lawyers, what have you. I thought they learned this language somewhere else over the summer, legalese. When they got to Mr. Braxton, they said, "Mr. Braxton, what do you think?" And my response was, "I think laws are for the poor, rich can afford their own." And so the response was, "How could you dare say that?" My response was, "Be poor." And there are lots of ways of being poor. Lots of ways. Most times we think about poverty as with cash. Poverty can be also in power and access, which has a greater impact on people than the money. If you found a couple of $1,000, you gotta help yourself out. But the other way of poverty, when you deny everything, you can't speak up for who you are. You can't expose yourself as who you are for fear of something bad happening to you. You know, it's horrible. And then think about it. It's not only from the person up until recently, and it still exists, who was outside, but the person who can also been in your own home. And that has to be a burden that's unbelievable. So there would be no way that I could understand those kind of lessons from my parents and not remember daily that I have to work on it. And before I end this, we should all remember today is Matthew Shepard's Day.
Thank
Oh,
you.
yes, yeah.
Thank you for mentioning that. Very good. Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, so my work today is with the War Resisters League. I am the New England regional organizer. And WRL's declaration, which is shared by War Resisters International, says that war is a crime against humanity and that we won't participate in war of any kind, but that we will also work nonviolently to remove the causes of war. So I think War Resisters League within that embeds this intersection of the issues. And I think it always has in so many ways. In fact, that Bayard worked with us, the fact that this has kind of been a piece of our history, that Mandy and I were this morning meeting with the new staff. We're talking about kind of the intersections of the environment and militarism, looking at the issues of poverty, sexism, racism, human exploitation of all kinds. We see that, I think one of the things I've learned from being part of War Resisters International is that we in the United States cubbyhole things more than I think many other cultures do. So somehow we think, well, here's the peace movement, here's the anti-racist movement, here's the LGBTQ movement, you know, and they're all like little cubbies, and that we do that, and then we have these little battles about who's more important, and you know, like all of that. And I think as a feminist, one of the things that I learned in the 1970s was really, in a lot of ways, the violence of hierarchy. And I think hierarchy is the hierarchy of our thinking, too, right? And so all of these issues are important. And if we don't work on them in that kind of way of bringing them together, I don't think we're gonna get anywhere. I mean, how can we talk about militarism if we don't talk about poverty? There's a poverty draft. You know, kids who don't necessarily want to go in the military have to go because they have no other way of supporting themselves. And then who gets killed at higher rates? People of color. Who doesn't get really to move up into officers? People of color. So that there's a lot of intertwining of a lot of these issues. Now we can also look at sexism, we can look at sexual assault in the military is a very severe problem. So we see these kind of intersections of things. So I think that sometimes it's a challenge as an organizer to figure out, well, how do you deal with all of this? So you may need a campaign that's very focused, but you've always got to have that analysis as the base. So I think that when you're doing that work, that needs to be kind of a piece of that. I think the other thing I want to say about this is two things, I think. One is, in doing this work, one of the things that I feel like in terms of the history of here, the Community for Nonviolent Action and Bayard's role is people have relationships with one another. People in who we might see as primarily this movement or that movement or that movement. When you look at like the list of who did who was the resource people for the nonviolence training in New London in 1960, you'd think, oh, well, but that was part of that movement, and they were part of this movement, you know, but they came together and they had those kinds of relationships. We were in this very room cleaning out Marge Swan's stuff after she died, one of the co-founders here, and we opened a box that had a whole bunch of cards, and one of them said, somebody said, can we just throw this away? And her daughter said, no, let's look at them. And suddenly we open it, and it's Love, Coretta, and Martin. Because there was a strong relationship between the Swans, who helped co-found this place, and the Kings, because Coretta Scott and Marge Swan were in the NAACP in Yellow Springs, Ohio together. And Coretta used to babysit the Swan kids when both of them had to go to meetings. So some of it, and then the Community Land Trust in Georgia gets started, and Slater King, Martin's cousin, calls on Bob Swan, who lives here, who's trying to develop this Community Land Trust idea to work together. So it was started for black farmers who were getting kicked out of their homes because they were voting or even talking about voting. So the intersections are not just theoretical, they're just not analytical, they're also people. And so I think that to me is a really important part of kind of how we build relationships with one another so we could do this work together.
Well, I just want to share. I'm glad you mentioned Mississippi. I have two quick things. I'm thinking of, when I said about the power of one, I said I didn't understand that. Emmett Till, Money, Mississippi. And of course, the story had gone that, he walked in, whistled at the white woman behind the thing. They tells the husband and the cousin, they go to where Emmett was staying, take him into the barn to teach this black boy a lesson. Well, something went terribly wrong, because he was ended up being murdered, shot in the head, bound up, and thrown in the river. And they found his body, and called his mother back in Chicago, and she said, "Send my baby home." But it's what she did next about the power of one. I want an open casket because I want people to see what hate looks like. And she had a lot of pushback because people said, for both sides, you don't want to do that. But she said no. Probably not realizing that that one simple no, the impact it would have. And of course, what was it? Either Jet or someone came and covered that.
I think it was
Jet Magazine?
Jet Magazine. Did it.
Yep.
It was in Money, Mississippi.
Yep.
The woman was alive up until recently in my hometown.
And thank you. After all these years, Swanee said it never
I
happened.
remember as a kid,
Yeah.
standing with my father, having him point at a man and say that he is one of the men who killed
There you
me.
go.
She lived with her son in my hometown basically until she
Really?
died. The store, Bryant's store, is crumbling and falling apart right now, and it should be a national.
That should be that needs to be a national.
See, there are things, again, I said not to tell you off.
Yeah.
Seeing it, being there is different than reading about it.
Yeah, definitely.
There were people who came from Chicago and places on their way back to Mississippi that were turned around to the Tennessee border because they were afraid of having problems. Because the myth was that we would roll over at every incident was not true. It's a good myth, but not true. And when you talk about the power of one and people connecting, I put some books out back. There was a book that was out on loan I was going to bring. It was called Why We March. You ever hear of it?
Oh, yeah.
You know who wrote it? A. Philip Randolph.
Oh, thank you.
And if you read the quote on the cover, it thinks Dr. King. Because the first march on Washington was going to be
Oh, that's right.
in the 40s. And in order for that march to be called off, Truman agreed to integrate the services. And who was working with A. Philip Randolph at the time?
Yeah, fired.
You got it.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just want to finish up real quick. Here's what's great, though. That casket sits in the National Smithsonian Museum in D.C. And again, the only reason why I mention this, and it was only recently this woman who had accused said it never happened, but that's not the first time you heard that. But I want to mention another name, James Byrd Jr., because people might have remembered this, Jasper, Texas, James Byrd Jr., black guy, picked up on some white guys, chained his feet to the back of the truck, dragged it, and basically murdered. And some of us of color in the movement said, we should really be speaking up about this of color, and they said, that's not because he's not gay. Well, yeah, and then Matthew Shepard happens, and I think the mother said basically, why does my son end up on the cover of Time magazine? And people said about James Byrd Jr., well, that's what you expect, until the mothers got together. And when the mother, because they just buried two of their sons under hate. And so when you talk about intersectionality and why you make those comparisons, and thanks to Obama, there's now a thing called the Matthew Shepard, James Byrd Jr. hate crimes bill. Again, the power of one. So I only say this because sometimes I think we're talking about movement heavies, who everyone knows. No, it's just the everyday people thinking you can make a difference, what it might make, what that might make to be. So Matthew Shepard, Jamesburg Jr. reality. So anyway.
I didn't know Jamesburg was gay.
No, that's the whole point. He wasn't.
Wasn't gay.
That was because it was a hate crime.
Oh, right.
Right.
Just
So
and that, you know what you just, I mean, and I'm not because everyone said, well, he's not gay, so what would you be? Because when gay organizations start setting up, they would define the only thing we consider to be around equality as being gay. And someone said, no, the only equality we might think is about being a woman or a person, whatever.
Yeah.
But when the commonality is that someone can kill you because of who you are and you're bearing your people, that's the intersectionality. And then the question is, what do you do about it? What are the common themes around it? And then when you start realizing it's not just about me, and again, getting away from the hierarchy of oppression, but it was just unbelievable, but because the mothers got together and we had that common conversation about why, it had nothing to do with it. It's about, hey, and I have a right to kill you, and or I have a right to be talking about the equality of the issue. What it made, that's good.
Interesting thing was that when Shepard's father was being interviewed, and they were talking to him, he said, I didn't know that kind of hate existed. I didn't know they would do that to someone.
Yeah.
Because the shoe had not been pressed on his foot.
There you go.
Right.
And the thing about I'm a history buff, and I like science. And there are common themes that run through mankind. Anything you don't know, you fear.
Mm-hmm.
And if you throw some stereotypical things at it that exacerbate, cement, and fertilize that fear, it's even worse.
Mm-hmm.
And you knew about Emmett Till.
Mm-hmm. Emmett Till.
But there was another guy before Emmett Till, one of the men. And you ever hear of Willie McGee?
I think vaguely.
Well, this man was a very handsome man living in the Meridian area of Mississippi. And he was accused of raping a white woman in her bed while her child was in the bed with her and her husband was in the living room of the small house.
Oh.
So they are going to have a trial. Anyone ever hear of Bella Abzug?
Mm-hmm.
Bella Abzug and a number of other people all raised money in New York for his defense. I think 3 to 5 trials for this man. And the crazy thing about it was that he never took the stand. His last trial, he was convicted of all appeals. And one day this woman was visiting her mother in Mississippi, and she was helping her clean the house. Those who grew up in the house in the South poor, you didn't have a safe, you had a mattress. And you raised the mattress between the box spring and mattress, you put all the important papers. So they're about to flip the mattress over, and she looks down, she sees this newspaper, and she grabs it. The mother grabs it by, she says, "You don't need to see that." She goes, "What's this?" She said, "We'll talk about it later." So she tells her the story about Willie McGee, and that it was her uncle, and that he had been electrocuted for the rape of this white woman. And it's terrible, and somebody should do something about it. This young lady decides, this is only about 8 years ago, to start to do research on it. She comes back to the town. There's still a lot of people alive. She starts asking questions. The woman's dead, or almost dead. And then she starts interviewing people. She interviewed one guy who was involved, and he says, "Well, it shouldn't have happened. We shouldn't be digging up things like that." She said, "Well, I've heard that they may have had a relationship." To which he responded, "There's no way that any white woman would ever have any interest in a black man." She finds the son of the district attorney who tried the case. And when she talked to him, he relayed a story that on the day of the execution, he went to visit the man in jail. And he says, "Look, you're going to die. You can tell me the truth, such and such." And he said to him, "She enjoyed it as much as I did." And there were a lot of men involved in relationships who paid with their lives. And in Mississippi, the way you paid is that if you were found guilty, we had a traveling electric chair. That chair was brought to the courthouse in which you were convicted. A generator was started up outside, you were sat in the chair and electrocuted on the spot.
Man.
Next one.
Well, I'm So I'm Margaret Breen, I'm a professor at UConn, and one of the things I'm really struck by as I'm listening to you all speak is one of you mentioned the power of one. Jan, you talked about the importance of recognizing people as people. Lonnie, you talked about standing there naked.
Mhm.
You know, the commitment to principle, the commitment to integrity, and the incredible vulnerability and strength that coexist in that commitment. And Carolyn, you talked about really being present and witnessing, answering the call, you know, the call, here I am. And one of the things that this reminds me of, I mean, these are all different understandings of how, when we, and I'll use your term, John, when we see people as people, and remember always that people are people, as opposed to abstractions, as opposed to a number or a series of numbers on an arm, or on some file, that it becomes much harder to dismiss people. But it's much harder not to recognize our shared connections, our shared humanity. The work I do, I teach LGBT Lit. I taught the first LGBT undergrad courses that began in the 90s at UConn. I also started the first Holocaust literature class. I do that because of my own background. I'm half Austrian, I grew up in Germany. My own family, my mom's family were socialists, which is to say left, not national. They faced some hardship during the war, but were not targeted for extermination, targeted as asocial, but not, so they weren't killed for their beliefs or imprisoned. One of the things that I learned from my the little study that I've done on the Holocaust is that actually the Nuremberg laws, the racist laws that Hitler put into place, the Nazi scholars who began working on these laws in the 1920s as part of the young Nazi party before Hitler came to power in 1933, where did they go to understand about
Eugenics.
segregation and legal segregation? But they went to the Jim Crow laws.
There you go.
And so that the Nazi scholars made the connection. The other end of seeing the connection is how do we transform our understanding of people as people to abstractions. So they study the effective racist policies of the United States. The other thing that I was thinking and hearing you speak is reminds me of the connections of the ways in which historically groups have been oppressed through acts of sex, through daring to love across conventional divisions, whether those be across racial lines, across gender divides, or within gender divides when it's supposed to be gender binary. And I'm reminded of something that's fairly recent for all of us, for most of us, not for all of us. But if you'll remember in 2004 when Massachusetts was the first state to allow same-sex marriage, the law that shut down the ability for non-Massachusetts residents to go to Massachusetts and get married was an anti-miscegenation law, race-based law, the 1910 law that said we will not marry anyone who in their home state will not have their marriage recognized. So it's important to see on that level that legislation that's attempted in 1910 was attempted as a kind of racist wink-wink, legislative wink-wink to those states that had overtly anti-miscegenation laws in place. That law wound up then being redeployed, a law that was seen as sort of suspended, having been suspended by 1971, and what is it, Loving versus Virginia, right? But that law was reactivated, redeployed. So it's so important for us to see these connections. And I'll just say one final thing. I was struck by the video. Carolyn and I, this is a confessional moment. We were coming up, we were kvetching about the second video on Rustin for our young, effective presenter. But that moment when he was talking about Rustin's imprisonment and then we saw in the background the newspaper article. Did any of you all get a chance to look at that? If you weren't so taken by the young man. And it said, he was arrested on, I think, morals. Moral laws.
Yeah.
But then it went on to say that he was arrested along with 2 white men.
Yeah.
So that the not so subtext there is that there are 2 violations. One for which he can be prosecuted, that is to say, an obscene sexual act, gay act. But the other thing he's being sensationalized and objectified for in the press is the interracial condition.
Yep.
And I think it's important for us to recognize how that works, that even if laws are in place for one, there are ramifications for then other kinds of connections.
Don't you believe that when you saw that article, that was a lot of work? It was not by accident that the article appeared.
Oh, yeah.
It was not by accident that information appeared there. There were a lot of people who were hiding in plain sight and things were buried. But you can believe that he was one person that the FBI was following on a continuous and regular basis.
I have to say, and Carol, I'm going to ask you a question about this too. What I'm struck by, it's profound to me that incident happened 1953. And then you think about that. But also I'm looking at our president, who's also the son of an interracial marriage. But I'm also thinking about, this is just me asking kind of the question, how whatever it was around Bayard or whatever that was, for him to have sustained that. And then also, don't even get me started about Adam Clayton Powell. But then you have to ask, how in the world was he able to get all that done and still turn around, and even though someone would say Bayard who around that incredible March on Washington 63, and then the journey about a lot of people thinking he was so critical despite all of that, to say that we've got to acknowledge that, and then now a lot of us who are black, queer, and out as can be, whatever that journey is, and I'm going to just ask this question of you. I have never been a person of faith. It's never been a part of my whatever I can say. And what I loved about the Quakers was pretty much, you go to a meeting, you sit there, if you have something to say, you have something to say. That's basically what it is. But there's something about this founding, and if you want to call it faith-based or something around whatever this thing is, and the Unitarians, when you think about what you do, and I'll ask this as a question, I'm struck by it because of the civil rights movement. It was the farm worker struggle. This issue of faith, something you feel so tangibly involved in, and now how that has seemed to be some kind of a piece of what makes change happen as well. And so, would you identify yourself as a person of faith or faith in terms of that kind of attitude, whatever? Okay. And then you have, everything Episcopalian, whatever it might be. But that seems to be a common theme to me. And then Lonnie, you're a lawyer, you're a prosecutor. I don't know if you have any faith-based stuff, and Joanne, and anyone in the room. But is there a piece of that seems to be whatever this puzzle and/or the complexity of how change can happen? You have something that you believe in, and however it might be defined. And I'm asking that in a major kind of way, because for me, I don't know how I can organize without tapping into the faith-based part of what we do, practically speaking, but also just kind of spiritually as well. So I'm just throwing it open to each one of you.
Before I lose a thought, I came across some info about him several months ago, long before this. I even knew anything about this, and this because I read a lot. And I'm a firm believer that you have faith, but you also have to have something that goes with that faith. And that my father used to say, you can't kill a dead man. And when you get a person like that who stands up naked and says, I'm already dead, and that what can you, if you don't have anything, what can you take? If you've given away everything, what can they take? So all the things that he had probably gone through as a young man, all the battles he had to fight, and if you grew up where he grew up, and people had the least indication that you were not manly, you know what he was going to do. But he had already had a baptism by fire. So, you know, he had been probably trained in under the worst of conditions. So he met some of these people out of the south and into the north. They were amateurs, and he had been dealing with professionals all this time.
I want to make sure I understand. Are you asking how my faith informs my activism, or?
Okay, big picture in terms of just how sometimes societal changes happen, but also personally as well.
Sometimes how the silent changes happen?
Societal changes. I mean, if you think about civil rights movement, it's not coincidental that you have Cesar Chavez in terms of United Farm Workers. It's almost like there's something constant about that. So it's almost a personal, but there's something about whatever this thing is, but now people like opening, confirming, and whatever. But it's just a question I'm asking each of you, and it could be open to the audience as well. So for you,
For me, you know, I'm part of a faith tradition that has in our 7 principles by which we guide our communal life and our individual lives a commitment to justice. You know, it's right there in our principles. So I was raised Catholic, but I was drawn to Unitarian Universalism because, in large part, of that commitment. So, and yet, it is a fine line to walk, to be serving a congregation in what I am experiencing as a very challenging, heartbreaking, devastating, shocking time in our history. How do you serve a congregation, and how do you inspire oneself and others to walk in this time toward justice, and also accept and create the kind of spiritual and religious nourishment that I think we all need in order to keep going, you know, to sustain ourselves in this time. And I think that, you know, I think MLK is a great example of that kind of faithful focus, but also very vulnerable. You know, he was, as I'm sure, I'm saying what many of us here know, you know, toward the end of his life, he was not embraced by many in faith communities and beyond. But he didn't waver, however difficult that lack of support became for him at the end of the year. I think his faith is what allowed him to keep on. So I think that's true for me personally. I hope that I serve in a way that buoys the people that I serve and the people that I work with to understand that at the center of Unitarian Universalist faith is that commitment to justice, but as well we have to keep that ember of hope alive. And I think that is particularly challenging right now.
Yeah, I want to bring it back to Bayard Rustin and Polly Murray. So Bayard was very influenced by his grandmother, who was a Quaker, and being a pacifist was something that not only he was, but he influenced many other people. When he was the FOR field staff, he met a young man named Bob Swan, who he influenced Bob Swan to be a pacifist, and then they both ended up in jail during World War II, refusing to go into the military. And it's interesting to look at Polly Murray, who later in her life chose to become an Episcopal priest at a time when women were really struggling to be able to kind of perform that. I think I've worked in both Catholic Peace Fellowship, a faith-based organization, and then chose to work with Warby Sisters League, a secular organization, although it includes a lot of faith-based people. And I think that, to be honest, I think there's two sides to it. And so I think that we do know where people of faith have really been really important and led and do lead in the movement. I also think that it was because FOR was a Protestant organization that they kicked Bayard out, because they worried about that from that faith base. And I think that's also why Southern Christian Leadership Conference kicked Bayard out. And that there's these kind of hierarchies, and there's a pecking order, and he wasn't there. And I think that one of the problems with a lot of the institutional churches is that the social justice and the hierarchical styles get kind of fight with each other on some level.
Yeah.
So.
May I mention a very different figure, but also someone who was doing work in mid-century, James Baldwin. Really important, did very important work for civil rights movement, and was vilified, called out because of his gayness, and was known as Queen James. Right? So there are interesting ways, again, in which we erase the complexity or the multi-dimensionality of our humanity, because there's some bit or some bits that somehow don't fit in the cookie cutter mold. And we get a flattened out version of, or sanitized version of history. And that's, and it's our loss. So it's so important to hear about Polly Murray, to hear about Bayard Rustin, and to remember these connections that they saw and worked on.
Can I mention about the connections, because it hasn't been brought up? They knew each other and worked together.
Yeah, that's what you said.
And that doesn't come out here at all, right?
Yeah.
And so what you do see is that the story of Polly Murray learning about Gandhi, and Bayard Rustin learning about Gandhi. So these are people who explored what was going on in India at the time it was going on. And there were religious folks who were the people who first began to bring over to this country kind of what was happening with Gandhi. John Haynes Holmes, I think, was one of the first people. And then it was actually at a thing called the Harlem Ashram that was started in 1940 that both Bayard Rustin and Polly Murray got involved. And that what that was an opportunity for blacks and whites together to explore what was going on in India and how could they use that to end Jim Crow segregation in this country. And there was a man who was an Indian who had been involved in the Salt March, who came over and studied at Columbia and wrote a book called War Without Violence. And it was basically his taking what the Gandhian movement was doing and kind of organizing it in a very strategical way that it could be understood so that it could be replicated in other ways. And he was also part of the Harlem Ashram, as was George Hauser, and George was also a World War II resistor, and Bayard were the nonviolence trainers for the Journey of Reconciliation. Bayard was the key organizer. And so really the reason I've kind of begun to learn more about this is that I'm a nonviolence trainer, and I've been doing a history of nonviolent action trainers. And so it goes back to Bayard, it goes back to the Harlem Ashram, it goes back, that's where I tripped over Polly Murray again. Like, oh my goodness, look who's here, And kind of that group of people who came together and really explored how do we use this power of nonviolence to get rid of Jim Crow segregation. And that to them was clearly kind of the road that they would take, and then how influential they became. You know, these people don't even know about, or the Harlem Ashram. I've been a trainer for 40 years, and it's only been the last 5 or 6 that I've learned about this. Kind of where people came together and really explored how to do this back in the 40s. So think of the civil rights movement. I mean, even if you look at, a lot of books will start with the Emmett Till story. I mean, here we go back to the late 30s and early 40s, and we see Bayard and Molly and a lot of other folks being kind of part of that.
I look at the movement really starting right after World War I.
Yeah.
Because when those troops came back from World War I, the things they had seen, the things they had done, they did not want things to go back to the way they were. And the largest group of black men who were lynched, around 17 or so, you'll never guess what they all had in common, the largest group. They were in uniform.
Can I real quick, and then I'd like to open it up. You know, you mentioned that today is a Matthew. You know what else today is? Yesterday was October the 11th, 2017. October the 11th, 1987 was the March on Washington. Guess who was asked to speak at that march? Bayard Rustin, when he passed before he was able to do that. So to talk about that journey from 47, 63, and then realizing in that journey, in a way, Bayard was queer as queer could be, he used to wear little whatever things. But I think about that because we're sitting in this room one day before this huge anniversary of which, had he lived long enough, he would have been at that march.
Yeah.
And if you remember the clip, you see the banner that says National Game, whatever that would have been, had he lived long enough, he would have been there. So my feeling is, in a weird way, it's like, thank you, Paulie, thank you, Bayard, thank you for every name but person you didn't know, but you knew had a role to play. And then what do we do with it now?
Yeah.
And who's there now? I'm looking at, where's Seamus? And I'm looking at Patrick, when I saw Patrick playing under their thing. We're going to have a meeting. And now Patrick's, there you see. We're in a profound, amazing moment. And we have the gift of having people share the stories and having this, and you think, so bring it. Let's talk about what's possible now, and to thank you for those who've been in the past and where we are now in terms of now. So maybe we could open up a little bit to y'all, because it's like 8:30.
Yeah, because I was curious on Pauli Murray and Bayard Rustin were such inspiring stories of activists who saw the intersections, who actually worked all of the intersections. But it's really hard, right? To do it now is really hard, and so I guess I'm looking for a little guidance. I've had a couple experiences lately that did I wasn't sure how to keep going. Right?
Well, you have a couple of examples of what you tried to do or done, Patrick, or not?
Well, so I also grew up around the War Resisters League, and I wanted to go to the 95th anniversary yesterday. But I work at Safe Futures, the domestic violence and sexual violence agency for Southeastern Connecticut. And I actually was teaching a domestic violence program at the sub base.
That's amazing.
That's why I couldn't go to this pacifist celebration, right? And as I'm doing it, I'm thinking, great, I get you guys for half an hour, but the rest of your job is that violence equals power. So how can I actually help you think about violence and power within relationships when that is the point of militarism?
Yeah.
It's we win over you, right? And so that's one challenge, and I'll get the second one, and then I'd love to hear. The other one is around the Black Lives Matter movement, and it's been so inspiring. I've seen his NFL players stand up, right? And Michael Bennett has been one of the most outspoken players, and he's plays for the Seattle Seahawks, and he just wrote a book. And so much of the book is great, but the introduction is all about how, this is not about the military. I have so much respect for what the military does. I don't know how we can identify how racist policing is in this country without acknowledging that we only bomb brown people, right? We don't bomb white people. We don't invade countries of people who look like me. The way we do militarism in this country is just as, if not more racist than our policing. Not that it's a competition, right? So how can we say, let's acknowledge racism here, but it's cool for us to do it to the rest of the world? And so, I'm inspired by Michael Bennett, and I'm no, it doesn't end at our border, and like, I want to support you, and I can't stand with you on that point. And so how do we do the intersectional thing when we're working with people who we do also have like major disagreements with?
Yeah.
But I wonder if he feels that he could even say anything about his choices, Colin Kaepernick's choices. If he didn't say right out of the gate, this isn't about the military, then who's going to buy your book? I mean, those folks are in such a difficult position. And I don't say that to defend him. It's just like,
No, it's a lot easier for me to say it. I'm not losing anything by saying it.
yeah.
Could I just say real quick before everyone else respond? Patrick, you have no ideas of whose lives you might have impacted just by doing what you did. That's what I'm saying. I think sometimes we way overlook. I mean, I thought every day we woke up by that damn war, and you saw the number, the count every night, and you kept on thinking, and then you realize, this is me. There's also something about how you can individually remove your personal complicity in however that might be. But you might have someone come to you later on, like what I did with that class, that's 40 minutes of my life, and it changed my life. You never know at that level of it. But then you figure out the chain of command, whatever they call that might be, but planting the seed that might happen, something else that goes on. But I get worried about someone says, I tried it, it didn't work, how long can I hang in there on this? It's really not more of that. It's the continuity, it's the persistence, and the consistency, and then you think about who else is around you. That would be me, but Joanne, Lonnie, what do you think? You want to respond? Anyone else too?
I want to commend you for teaching that class.
That's amazing.
Because
That is
teaching
amazing.
that class,
Amazing.
there's some child, some mother, somebody that is going to benefit that you will never know from what you have put in that
There you
person's
go.
head.
There you go.
So you do not sell yourself
Keep
short,
doing
nor the time that you're investing, because we're all receiving a direct benefit of it.
Right, and because you are the person who can say that when someone else can't,
Yeah.
that makes you really special. Because someone needs to hear it.
Well, thank you. And I like my job, and I go to a lot more places than just the Navy, right? I go to most schools and
Thank
things
you.
like that, right?
And it happens at school too.
Yeah, and so thank you for that.
Yeah.
But there is, I mean, for me, it also is that it still goes back to that challenge, right? Of like seeing the intersections, right? Like in lots of spaces, right? I'm in a spot where I'm working with people who they do, like the structures of schools, not necessarily inherently violent a lot, but it often is like, and I've seen teachers belittle kids in crazy ways. And then like the next moment, I'm teaching the kids how to calm down. Like their teacher, like they need to hear the lesson more than the teacher. And so, I mean, for me, it's like feeling pretty, it's easy to say intersection, right? But how do we live it on a daily? Like, how do we actually act in our lives, but also, like, I love the activism part, like going to spots, right? Like going to other people's events. But what happens when you feel that conflict? When you feel like the two things that I'm doing actually don't go along together? Whether it's complicity or whether it's just counteracting or, I don't know, or it's, I want to support you, but I can't get past this personal hurdle of my own beliefs.
I'm just curious, are there other people in the audience that are doing activism and like what's happening with y'all? Who's a couple that's doing? I mean, there's people here, so anything you'd like to share, Don't be shy.
I'd like to comment. My biggest challenge is not enough hours in the day. And sometimes you put so much energy into one thing, you care about the other things, but yeah, there's just not enough time, so you can't be in two places at once, which he was just saying. And then also the self-care that is needed, that burning out and needing time to rebuild. You don't want to miss out, and so that's a big challenge.
Others?
I'll say something.
Yeah.
I think I would like to say something really positive about doing very small, very tangible things. The main thing I do, well, there are two things I do. The main thing I do is I pull invasive weeds out of parks in low-income neighborhoods.
There you go.
And, I could spend an hour and do an area that's 3 feet by 3 feet, but after that, people can look at that small area and say, someone cares a little about our neighborhood and about invasive weeds that, increased rates of asthma and allergies among kids who live in that neighborhood. And the other thing I do, and this is sort of an open invitation for people to contact me, is I have a public access TV show. And anyone in the area who'd like to come, and it's usually a live show, but we can tape if the live schedule doesn't work for people. Anyone who's doing anything interesting and uplifting, who can get to Waterford, Connecticut for a day, is welcome to be on the show. And there are people here who have been on the show, and there have been a lot of interesting people that I have actually met through it. So none of these things are organizing big events or having a really high profile, but even doing very concrete small things can be helpful and help people stay sane.
Yeah, I just want to say something about what Patrick, because I've, being an organizer in this community, which is such a militarized community, it's something that I think that certainly I've had to do a lot of thinking about. I think that, one of the things that is sacred in this country is patriotism, and that is used to silence people, to whitewash people, right? When we quote Martin Luther King Jr., we don't quote him saying the greatest purveyor of violence in the world is the United States. We quote him saying, little black children, little white children walk together. When we do the Martin Luther King holidays and the like, we kind of make him look like like a really acceptable guy who thought everything was just fine, no. But I mean, and he talked about nonviolent direct action, bringing out the tension, he talked about this kind of power and dynamic, right? But we don't want to talk about that greatest purveyor of violence. And I think because of patriotism is used to silence us so often, that's a piece of, that's why the football players are all like, no, this is, they spend more time saying this isn't against the military than they're able to spend time saying this is against the militarism of the police, right? And not being able to even use that term because that's so connected to the veterans. I think that's our biggest challenge. I mean, that's when the saber rattling of war goes and we have to create the other, and then it's like, if you don't hate them, you hate the United States, right? Or whatever side. I mean, this is not just a dynamic here, but because we're here and having to address that. And so I think that is a great challenge to kind of, particularly we talk a lot, and I think within the movement of kind of looking at the intersections, it's easier to talk about racism, sexism, homophobia. It's easier to talk about those issues sometimes, but then when you do put militarism through it, what does that do and what does that mean? And I think we see those tensions. Even if you look at nuclear weapons, nuclear power, can we talk about both at the same time? Even though we see them connected, some are like, oh, that's not effective. So we get back into that effectiveness article, issue. You're only going to be really effective if you cubbyhole it again. So it's a challenge. I think we have to work hard at doing that.
Stone?
Yeah, so I wonder if you see any kind of model for a broad-based coalition for resistance movements. I'm asking because I'm thinking that we are existing here in a failing empire with fundamental crises of ecology, of increasing inequality, racist violence, and ongoing colonialism, and all that. But everyone is speaking about resistance to the point that it's inflated, where contacting your congressperson is a form of resistance. At the same time as we are so divided into so many different groups, and I'm looking for like a model of how we could have more broad-based coalition work, where we still respect the differences between us.
Oh, we can go down the line. I would just like I'm going to give some words of hope and optimism.
And I'll just be, because I was sitting here thinking, when I left Durham, I was talking to a woman who was going to have another conference, and her concern was it's just the same old white women always coming. And I said, you know, then I asked this question, it's a bigger one, and it's one we can all ask at this point. If you were to figure out how you could set a table and have as diverse number of people around that table, what would be the thing or things as to why they would bother to show up? Why would they come? And I think there's a few that some of us, we can really understand. Clean air, clean water, no one should be hungry, no one should be homeless, everyone should have access to health care and an education. And I was just saying earlier, and if you put that on the local level, that's what really makes the dynamic difference. If you talk about what your neighborhood is, what your county is, no matter where you live, and what language that you speak, all of a sudden, now it won't happen overnight, but at least you extended the damn invitation. But here's another thing I always wonder. As an organizer, what I always find is like, can you come to my table? My table's set. You're always saying, can you come to my meeting? Can you come to, have you thought about, other tables are set out there. Do you ever get up and go out to the other ones? They're asking the same damn question.
Right.
You know, so then the question is, who's going to be able to, this is what I would suggest as an organizer. So you have the autonomy of whatever your organization might be, because you love who you are and what you're going to do. And then there's other tables over again, we love who we are and what we're going to do. But the second you say, and then we're going to, together, because we have joint ownership, start a third thing that's sitting out here because you bought into it from day one, you started it from, we're here, and then we're going to form something. But it has to be something doable, something you can see the results of. And I can tell you one of those things is voter registration. One of them can be doing exactly what you said. One of them can be community gardens, because we've been trying to end war for how many years? I joined the Warrior Sisters League, believing all war. Well, that ain't going to happen in my lifetime. But if I mow a lawn, I see the damn lawn. Why am I spraying so much? But you know what I mean? When you get it down to that level, all of a sudden, but wait a minute. And I'm going to give a demographic that really inspires me. I mentioned it last night at the thing. By 2050, if not sooner, this country will be majority people of color, and not just black folk. Majority people of color, women will be soon a majority. Who were the first set of people told you can't vote, you can't, whatever? But who was already here before we showed up on these lands? So if everyone walks around, no shade around, oh my God, it's overwhelming, nothing I can do, it might be hard to get up every day. But if you say, yeah, and this could be my moment for this year, whatever month, but it's the ones that came before me, people who are here now. I'm looking at the young ones running here. They're going to be around 20 years from now. Who's going to go forward? So when you have that level of hope, but what's the commonality? What's the thing that says why we should be in each other's spaces for a reason to be a part of humanity or whatever it might be, and not just in English? So my hope is bring it and keep it a constant 10, knowing the challenges. But I have friends of mine, oh God, nothing I can do. No. You know, but also, and don't ask the same people that are doing 1,000 things. There's people out here dying and waiting for someone to be invited. Yeah. Extend the invitation. When that young man said there's a high school work camp, if he hadn't offered that, I would probably not be in front of you. So what are we doing about it? And every person has a chance to make. So that's my hope.
Right.
I feel optimistic 100%, but there's got to be some practicality.
See, one of the things you just said, and you've mentioned a number of examples. So look at the United Farm Workers, look at a lot of things. Mm-hmm. A good campaign has something for everybody to do. Mm-hmm. Right? It doesn't mean we're all getting arrested. It doesn't mean we're all kind of need to be out in the streets all the time or doing encampments or whatever. But there has to be something for everyone to feel. Yeah. It's got to be about personal empowerment, which I think speaks to that kind of question of people, when we kind of get to that intersection, we've probably all gotten there on different roads. Mm-hmm. Because some speaks to me, from Andy and I, high school class in 1966, the war was raging when we graduated. That was like the year we graduated was the first year that the draft was really a threat, right? So that affected our lives. Mm-hmm. Feminist movement, late 69, early 70s, that affected our lives, mm-hmm. right? So there was just so many things that kind of like, that's the road you get in. But then you go in and then people are like, what does the war and feminism got to do with each other? And then you kind of moving all the other, lines in together. So I think we need to but we need to be open to folks. And I think what Constance, if we're all burnt out all the time, people are going to say, no, why should I get involved? Do I be as crazy as that one is over there? And never have a day off and never do that,
No.
So it is that balance, right? It is that, Gandhi said that, the model for kind of nonviolent social change was doing that political action, that nonviolent resistance, doing the constructive program, the gardens, the community land trust, the kind of building the new society, and personal development. And we can't personally take care of ourselves and we can't develop if we're so busy with one or two of the other things that we're kind of not being whole people, and then people don't want to get involved. So I do think as organizers, though, we need to be more strategic and more creative about how do we create the kinds of campaigns and the kind of movement that can kind of really bring more people involved in where they can be, and knowing they may be in different places at different times, or there's circumstances in our lives, but it's kind of moving that needle closer to social justice.
Lonnie, inaccurate. Either one.
No, I was just thinking about what you said. All of these things kind of rally around dehumanization. You can't kill another person, but you can kill an it or a thing. And the first thing we do is give it another name.
Yep, that's
we
it.
dehumanize it, then we kill it.
Yep.
And we do that, to each other, and we do it to an organization because they're not us. They're something else.
I'm just going to do a pitch for the one small thing.
Nice.
And that is, I think, working in community, and the kind of community that I am so fortunate to work in the church community, is that there are so many people within the congregation that I serve who never would get on a bus to go anywhere and do anything. They're too shy, they've never done it before.
Yeah.
Whatever the reason is, they don't know how to get there. But the power of working with, I think, within a faith community is that you can say, we're gonna get 2 buses. You don't have to worry about where to park. You don't have to worry about driving there. You don't have to worry about not knowing anybody. Just sign up. You're gonna know somebody on the bus, right?
Yeah.
Or you can support and inspire a bunch of youth, which is what we do. Eileen's daughter was part of this, in fact. Who at the aftermath of the Parkland shooting, say we're like many other young people that age, say we're gonna do this. We're hopping in. We're gonna make some change, and then the grown-ups in their midst are kind of shamed into getting their asses on the bus. So I think there is that synergy in if I could make a pitch for being in faith community and community. That inspires people and gives them the confidence to do things they never would do before, whether it be holding a sign at Soldiers and Sailors, or getting on the bus, or whatever it is. It just gives folks kind of the structure and inspiration and opportunity. Mike Stevens here doing so much of our good anti-racism work. So there's something about that.
I like that.
When I'm hearing you all talk, what I'm hearing is different models of leadership. That, there's Constance. Constance who called us all up and said, can you do this? So Constance going out there and putting an event together, or collaborating to put an event together with Joanne. But leadership also comes in the form of being willing to lead and know and recognize that no one will follow, which is what you were talking about, Lonnie. One of the things you were talking about. And leadership also comes in the form of what you were saying, Mandy, in terms of going to another table. In other words, being willing to listen, being willing to participate, being willing to follow. That is itself a kind of leadership, and I hate that word self-care. I think it's a ugly word, and I find the concept suspicious. That said, we have to have ways of. I know some of you are runners. We can't run a long race. And for those of us who are committed, who see our lives as driven by vocation, by calling, the race is a long one, and we can't do it at a sprint. There have to be times, there has to be not simply, to mix metaphors, a flow, but an ebb. And so following, in that sense, is a kind of leadership. It's that gathering in, it's that paying attention to others, being present with others, witnessing others, but also then that becomes this form of nourishment, which I think is a much better word concept, that propel us forward.
So, yeah, are we on time and where are we? I mean, you kind of got a little, where, are there other things, Margaret, you want to draw out of us?
I want to hear from all of you.
Yeah,
I think there's some great activists in the room here.
Anyone who has something that they'd like, you always ask if someone's got, is there anyone who would like to share something that hasn't said anything yet, or you want to get it in? You don't have, no pressure, whatever, but you just need to, if not. I do want to share one story, but I want to see if anyone else has one. Yeah, please.
I'm not quite sure where this fits in, but as you all were talking, and I learned a lot about. I didn't know anything about Polly Murray, and I learned something about Bayard Rustin this evening. And I appreciate all what each of you shared, but I kept getting stuck on this intersectionality kind of wording because. And maybe it's just semantic and a small thing, but the thought that came to me was, we don't live at intersections, right? Like we don't put up a tent there, we pause there, hopefully we stop at the stop sign, and and take our turns and kind of meet each other. But they are kind of empty spaces in our cities, and New London is full of empty kind of car space. One estimate was 800 acres of our little tiny city. Is that right, Rana?
I'm sorry, I don't know that.
It's on paper. 800 acres of New London. Look it up. It is kind of given over to perpetual motion, and yet Polly and Bayard and all of you and hopefully us too kind of are trying to connect with one another, and you don't actually connect in intersections, right? Like you pass through, and so how do you make a life out of that? And I think it's more about solidarity, which is a really old word. And intersectionality is kind of like a new hip word. But I kind of found myself, I was thinking about these two incredible lives, which were full, like whole lives of many different phases of learning and resistance and connecting and taking care of themselves, right? That was a sweet picture of Bayard and Walter next to the little car. Right? That was self-care. So vineyard. Right? Like this is our life, right? Like these are our lives, and these are the lives of our children. And
Nice time.
And they have to be for the very long haul, and I really appreciate how you talked about that, Margaret. And as being part of Caroline's faith community, find an incredible amount of nourishment there, and the opportunity to pause, right? Like I am not kind of cutting edge, like vanguard right now at all, and I'm troubled by that, and like kind of okay with that, because there are these incredible people doing such good work in our community, and I don't know, I don't want to live at an intersection, but I do want to be in really deep relationship and solidarity with everybody at some point, and building a life that coalesces with the lives of other people and addresses the needs that come our way. And to do that in a way that's intentional and lasting, right? So anyway, that's some of what kind of all you provoked.
I think that's also, it's a very loaded term, right? So that in some circles, when you say intersectionality, the academics get really pissed off at you because you're not recognizing the fact that actually it comes from, Black academic feminists who kind of see, well, this is where my life, this is where our personal lives intersect. And we've kind of taken this word to basically mean the intersection of our movements or how they come together. But you're right, intersection kind of means this, right? And so Reverend Barber talks about fusion. That was kind of the word used with the Board People's Campaign. This year's Board People's Campaign was that we want to fuse these things together, not just bypass them. And I think there are many times in our movements where we're kind of in between terminology. We're kind of transitioning in and then transitioning out. So I don't think intersection or intersectionality, I think I think we will intersect right past that at some point. But not concept, but the word. As we find a better way of trying to talk about and embody what we're trying to do.
But can I just throw out something, thinking about this, like if you're black and you're a woman and you're lesbian, I wake up with that every day, and there's a whole number of us in society that do. So it's almost as if all you know is all you know. And I wonder sometimes when you meet someone, you just automatically, the minute they say anything or how they're dressed, you make all these assumptions. And if you don't take the time to ask, what's been your journey, who are you? And so I'm just wondering, also just the pure humanity of something. And so when you said that, Frida, I was also, that's the latest term or whatever, but that's the realities of everyone's life. And also something else I'm struck by, we're talking about this, can we put the issue of class into this conversation? Class, think about it. If you go into some of the most rural black counties of North Carolina, all you got there is black folk, and that's all they've ever known, that's all their family's ever known. But then, because then you have the poultry industry coming in, or the hog farms coming in, and they start bringing brown people off, and I don't mean that in any negative way, they start trying to pit black folk, and then they realize they're all doing the same thing to us, but and also class could just be, you don't have that, nothing. There's a lot of poor white folk in Mississippi that don't have nothing either, but someone told them at least you have white skin, so you have, what is that? And I want to add another part to this, what I think is really amazing. We have a thing called the Ascetic Social Justice Fellowship. It's just a wonderful thing where someone gave a lot of money for living wage for some young people to do great work in Asheville, North Carolina. And one of the women who applied does not speak a word of English. She only spoke Spanish. Now, someone else could have said, hey, nothing we can do, sorry, you can't have it. You know what they did? They put the resources to hire interpreters, but language justice. It wasn't just interpreting language, Spanish to English, English to Spanish, but it was around the backdrop of what the cultural reality of was. That was a game changer. Yeah. And now, if you notice, the Highlander Center for years has always done stuff in English and on the backside of Spanish. So they're ahead of the curve. So when you ask this question, Dawn, about what are the reality, this is day-to-day stuff. Now, I flunked Spanish when I was in high school because I wanted to be a doctor. I thought, when am I ever going to need this? Who knew? Now you have El Centro Hispano teaching conversation Spanish because it's intentional. So sometimes it's like, think outside the box. Don't look at the usual same old, same old. You have to think, well, this doesn't happen. Create something. Or someone comes along with a great idea. Let's just try that. But darn it, just try to figure out how you might just shake things up a little bit. But can I also say something else? Please use these words. No experience necessary. None. I've heard people say, I'm not an activist. I can't be like Martin Luther King. I can't be. No.
Learn the hard way.
Yeah, thank you. It's just what it is, right? And if you say that and you mean it,
Learn the hard way.
yes.
Show up.
And if you mean it, but you extend the invitation, thank you. But also then, but if you extend it, then you better figure out a way that it's going to be a practical thing in terms of what they can do.
Yeah.
The first Catholic church that was allowing to do their masses in English and Spanish was the Immaculata Catholic Church right up on Chapel Hill Street. That was not saying that we should do something. They started doing it. That church has been a game changer, involved in farm worker struggle, involved with black folk, involved with labor. So it's out there. So all I'm saying is that I don't like it, I don't want to do it, then what are you going to do about it in your neighborhood in the backyard? But again, just no experience necessary. Your passion is what might really make a difference, and then figure out what you can practically do with it, and then collectivize it. Anyway.
And do the trainings. I mean, and again, Bayer created the trainings. You know, that's a piece of it. We need to build skills. So how do we do that? And I think the thing is, one of the reasons probably a lot of us tell these stories and tell this history is that people, I guess this clipping, people know who Martin Luther King is, people know who Rosa Parks is. People don't know that the movement was really made up of millions of people.
Just folk.
It was
Just
those
folk.
folk who get on buses, those folk who refuse to buy grapes and, Andy Boy lettuce and all of those things during the farm workers. It's like, that's what makes the difference, right? It is in doing all those kind of things. Again, that's why organizers have to kind of get out there and both tell those stories, which I think are empowering, but also help kind of create one of those things that farm workers is a great example of, where everybody could do something.
And you also get paid to do this work, by the way, now, if you want. That's the other reality. This could be a vocation, if you think about it. Can we still buy grapes, do you think? I
Well, luckily, one of the good things they did was got us all off of iceberg lettuce anyway.
Oh, yeah. Now we just go romaine and...
Now we get all of the good stuff.
Yeah, Patrick and I don't know each other, but one of the things that that I have seen that speaks to me from something that you said was the whole idea of someone saying, I really like what you're doing, but I can't relate to this part of what, somebody who just like takes a little needle and like just sticks it in you to get you thinking. And like a really good example is a friend of mine who I met throughout CT put this thing on Facebook about a writing contest. And in the rules, no LGBT, no sexual violence, it had a list of rules for this writing contest. And I thought to myself, sexual violence, LGBT. And there were like other things, other parameters, and it kind of put LGBT in this group of, scary, awful things. And so I thought to myself, we just cannot let this go. You have to say something, because I think that when you walk by an incident like that, you're missing out on an opportunity that was dropped right into your lap. Thanks, Chris Bilo, for doing that. So I wrote a letter to the gal who ran the workshop, and I said, I beg to differ with you, Come to find out, she is a teacher at a Christian school, and, it's part of the parameters. She assured me that she had no ill will toward any gay, blah, blah, blah. Okay, but we had this polite conversation, and I respectfully disagreed with her. She said that she gets all this hate mail for having this creative writing workshop. But we had this thing that went back and forth, and I said to her, I do not claim to be trying to change your mind. I said, I just want you to open your eyes a little bit and look at this from a different point of view. Where did you get the idea that LGBT is not wholesome? Oh, she said she wanted her writing workshop to be wholesome. Okay.
The wholesome is boring.
Oh, yeah, well, it was really interesting. I said, where did you get the idea that LGBT isn't wholesome? I get to, LGBT is more than sex. Clearly, I don't think she wanted heterosexual sex stories either, but she didn't say that, okay? And you know what she did? She actually took the page where they were inviting writing, and she rearranged the page because of what I wrote, and took LGBT and took it away from sexual violence, which is a little teeny thing. It's a little teeny thing, but I wanted her to realize that when she did that, and she claimed to be not prejudiced against blacks, gays, whatever, but I just wanted her I wanted somebody to stick a needle in her and inject a little point of view that was just a little bit different, because she just claimed to be really open-minded and all that, and I wanted her to understand that she wasn't. And you know what? If no one does that, that was my little coup for like 3 days of having this email conversation back and forth with her. And I finally said to her, I have said my piece. I was ready to close the conversation with her. I've said my piece.
clearly, I'm not gonna change your mind, but I do want you to understand that there is another point of view out there that you have not even touched.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a lot of wonderful, creative, wholesome LGBT people, and you are totally cutting off a very rich and diverse part of the population that you are not even seeing.
Right.
And you know, people have to do that. And if you think that there's nothing that you can do, you can have an email conversation. You can befriend a neighbor's child who's not being given enough attention. You can collect books at a yard sale and give them to some school. There are a million things. I had a woman tell me one time, I don't want to have anything to do with your groups making AIDS quilts for AIDS babies, because I don't believe in that sort of thing. And I looked at her right in the, can you believe something you're saying? I said, I looked at her and I said, if you cannot do that, then choose a quilter. I said, make your quilts and donate them in some other way. I said, there are millions of opportunities for volunteer, social justice work. Just find the one that works for you and do something, damn it. Don't just sit back and do nothing. You know, that's the worst thing in the whole world that anyone can do is nothing.
I'd like to take this segue from the LGBTQ and end with an introduction. So I was a representative of OutCT, and I wanted to have someone from the current board just briefly speak to you. And that person had a meeting prior to this, so she couldn't come for the opening. But I said, well, you know, you'll do the closing. So I'd love to invite Kia Baird, the Vice President of OutCT, to give our closing remarks.
Hello, everyone. As Constance mentioned, I'm Kia Baird. I'm the Vice President and one of two remaining, probably about to be the last, remaining founding member of the LCT board. And I do not have remarks. I literally just am here to thank Constance for all the work that she's done from day one, even before day one, up until even planning today with Joanne. Constance has stepped off the board, stepped off of her role as president, but has never really left the organization and has been doing work for the organization, making sure that we continue to be true to the mission that we had, to not just do events and social events, but really make sure that we are encouraging conversation like the ones today. So thank you, Constance, for all of your work. Thank you to the panel. Again, conversation and education is a big part of our mission at OutCT, and we want to make sure that while we know in Southeastern Connecticut it really is important for us to have social gatherings where folks can get together and just kind of be, but we also want to make sure that we're incorporating the rest of the community so that they understand the things that we are experiencing and how similar they are to the things that other folks are experiencing in other communities. So thank you all. And thank you everybody.
Thank you for everything.